Alright, so let's go ahead and go through all of the individual components that we'll be using for this build. Now this is a Falcon 130 build, and this is the bottom plate for this. As you can see, it's a very minimalistic sort of just your basic plain X frame. This also ships with two different top plates. This guy here, the smaller one, can actually be used as the middle plate. On my personal build, I actually modified this and drilled out an SMA hole, so it's sort of a really low profile plate. For this build, we're going to be using this guy here. It's really nice with the SMA ports already in there, and if you want, you can optionally drill these or Dremel these off the side, which is what I did on my Falcon 185. I think it just gives us a smaller, lower profile look to it. And I believe that in the next version of Falcons, which may already be out by the time that you're viewing this, they may be cutting those side plates off, but I'm not sure. So the frame also ships with more hardware than you can ever need. Now this comes with several different lengths of standoffs. I think in the later versions there's even more options for that. One of the design principles of this frame is to be able to build it in several different configurations, and the configuration that we'll be doing today is pretty straightforward, and it's just going to use these standard red length things here. It actually looks like this kit here was a very early release. I don't have the serial number on me, but it looks like this kit here was actually a pretty early release, so it's got a few less options for standoff lengths than the newer kits do now, but plenty of options with how you want to build it. Some of the nice things, it's got these weird little 1/2 millimeter red spacers here, and those just barely separate your PDB from your frame just enough to keep it from shorting or anything, which gives you a lower profile build, makes that possible. It's also got these guys here, which are unthreaded little standoffs, and they're just, I believe, 5 millimeters long, which go between your PDB and your flight controller. So again, just a nice minimalistic, really short, tight stacked build. So yep, it's a frame. So then for our flight controller, we'll be using this guy. Now this is an Afro Flight 32. It's a Naze Rev 6. Pretty standard in most builds. Most people prefer the Naze Rev 5, but this is what the client had to offer for me. So we're gonna go ahead and use this. Some nice things about this guy is that it's got S-Bus, and you don't have to invert your X4R, I believe. It's got the buzzer ports and all that kind of stuff all built on. Everything should be good to go with that. So this guy is also flashed already with a version of Betaflight that the client put on before he shipped it to me. Now that is one of the most important things that you can do with your flight controller, is flash it before you start soldering anything to it. If you solder before you actually flash this and you don't make sure that it works, then if you go to plug it into the USB and nothing happens, or it won't boot when you power it up, and something's actually wrong with the board, it's going to be much more indicative that it was user error, and the likelihood that you can exchange it for a new working board just kind of drops there. So always make sure to flash your flight controller before you start building. And this guy, like I said, is already flashed with Betaflight. Alright, so in this build we're going to use a Power OSD here. Now this is an all-in-one sort of PDB and OSD system. It's no configuration, just kind of right out of the box. You plug it in and it's ready to go. You just wire it up, but you got your positive and negatives on these two sides here. Your grounds are on this side, your ESC power is all going to go here. Your battery leads are these two large holes here, and then you have your camera ins and outs and whatnot. And that, I like this system. I like the idea of it. We'll see how it goes with setup and configuration stuff, and just if it actually works right out of the box. That'll be really interesting. I am very curious to see if this works, because I may start using these in some of my builds. Alright, so for motors, we have the Rotor X or T-Motor branded 1306 4100 kV motors. Now these are optimal to use with 3S batteries, which is actually really good because it comes in just about 5% lower power than some of the 4S builds, lower on thrust ratios, but you also are able to find 3S packs much easier than the 4S packs. You can find them in the smaller capacity cells and stuff a lot easier and a lot cheaper, so that's a very big draw. And they're also lighter weight when you're using the 3S builds, so that's always something to keep in mind. Just these 1306 4100 kV motors are pretty awesome. I'm really excited to try to mate in this guy. So for ESCs, we are using 20 amp Little Bs. Now these are kind of your go-to in the FPV community at the time that I'm recording this. These are really nice ESCs. I've got them on a couple of my builds. I'm just now starting to actually test out some different ESCs, but these are kind of always going to be the go-to unless they start really getting blown out of the water. Right now they're just really reliable, they're cheap, they're available. You can find them from a few different vendors. So another standard for building at the time of recording this, the X4R receiver, and this is for your FR Sky transmitters like your Tyrannus. This is going to be depinned, so we'll take all of these guys here and the headers off, and then we'll chop off this little plug here, and that's going to give it this nice little minimalistic profile. Obviously the cardboard slides right off there, and then we'll wire it up with S-Bus and get it all tucked into this tiny little build pretty easily. And these guys are actually really easy to work with once they're depinned, and obviously they're your kind of go-to for your Tyrannus radio receivers. So for video transmission, we have a Hawkeye VTX. Now these things are really nice because they have a pigtail already built onto that. Now if I were using another VTX, I'd probably go into how to solder a pigtail onto the actual transmitter, which is a super useful thing to know because in my current build, I haven't done that yet on my Falcon 130. But this guy already done, already taken care of. So we'll have just this nice little video transmitter tucked in there. There's actually a cutout in the top plate of the Falcon 130 for these dip switches. We'll see if we're able to use that with our configuration and the layout that we go with for this build, but keep in mind that that top plate, this larger top plate, so keep in mind that this larger top plate here was designed so that these dip switches are readily available so that you can actually access them through this cutout here. So that's kind of nice, but I don't use these in my personal builds. I use a cheaper option that I like a lot, and just kind of I keep it consistent throughout all of my builds. But a lot of the guys running the Falcons are running these VTXs. They're fantastic VTXs, and they also have, like I said, the built-in pigtail already ready to go, which is just super, super handy. So for our camera, now these guys are kind of becoming the standard for your 3-inch builds. They're these tiny little micro cams you can get off of Banggood or Amazon for just under $10 a pop in most cases. Now for this mounting solution, I've actually been working with Lasdy, one of the designers of the Falcon frames, and I've designed a couple different little camera mounts here that are 3D printed. These are available on Thingiverse if you go there and search for HiFPV or HiFPV micro cam mounts or something of that nature. This guy's got to get cleaned up a little bit. This is fresh off the printer. So to utilize this, we'll actually be removing this little microphone here that the camera has. You can see this little circular thing right here. That's a microphone. We actually just chop that off, and then we route these wires through the little cutout in the back of the print here. Slide this guy in there. It fits in really snug. I used a little bit of hot glue on mine, even though I don't think it's going anywhere, just to be safe and make sure like water and stuff doesn't get down there. But this is something that's kind of a work in progress, and if you're watching this a month or two after I've recorded it or posted it on YouTube, then you probably, when you go to Thingiverse, you'll see a couple different renditions of this. This is sort of a ongoing project, and we're trying to figure out the best means of actually getting those cameras mounted on here. We do have an adjustable version that uses a screw and then this sort of holder for the camera here. This is a remix from Thingiverse that was already on there. So this guy actually can adjust and swivel and whatnot in one of my other designs. So that's good, but I like these fixed versions because personally, and for the person that I'm building this for, we just fly one camera angle, so I've just modeled it to match that, and I was able to put in a lot of material here, so it's going to be nice and sturdy. It's not going to break the first time that you bump into a gate or something. So yeah, little tiny microcams. These have a really wide field of view. You can't really tell by the lens, but they claim that they're 170 degrees. I personally love these things. They perform really, really well, and I'm actually considering putting a couple of these into my 5-inch builds just to do sort of like a slam down lowrider build because they're so small and so easy to work with. But visual, like picture quality, they're okay. You can go to my channel or you can look at some of the other videos in the channel and see how they really do. A lot of the 3-inch class videos that are just DVR are using these cameras. I think that they're fantastic. The only thing is they take a second to adjust, and if you're in a low light area and you're looking out like say a gap in the branches or something, and the sunlight will get blown out, and then if you're flying right at sunset and you look into the sun, it gets a little bit blown out. But you know, it's kind of like a give and a take, because using this tiny camera that weighs next to nothing, the picture quality is actually pretty awesome right out of the box, but some people don't like it and they prefer to have the HS1177s. I think those are a little bit too large for these builds, so we're going to use this guy, and it should fit in here just like the one that I've already built, and it just kind of all comes together really nicely. So a couple of odds and end things here. We've got just your standard Scorpion battery straps. Now something to note on the Falcon frames, I'm not going to do it in this video because this is sort of going to serve as an all-around build video and not necessarily specific to the Falcon 130. But one specific tip for the 130 is to put your battery strap in before you strap your PDB in. I don't want to have that floating around here while I'm trying to film. I want my frame to be sitting firmly right on the build table here. So I'm actually going to go through the hassle of putting this in after the fact, but a huge tip is to put this in before you build the quad, because it's going to save you a lot of time in trying to squeeze it between the frame and the PDB once you're done. This is just some sort of little, looks like left-handed circular polarized antenna that the guy had laying around. Then we've got some hover ship LEDs. These are purple. We'll put one of these in the front and one in the back of the frame. Very simple little guys. I'll have to look up what voltage that they run off of. Yeah, just some simple LEDs. These things are so small that they're pretty hard to spot when you dump them in a field after a crash. So in addition to that, you'll be able to see the LEDs, hopefully. And if you can't, then we're going to put this little piezo buzzer on here. Pretty simple again. I'm kind of worried about the space that this will take up in the 130 because it's such a tight little build. But you know, fingers crossed that we'll be able to use this, because it would be really nice to be able to hear where it's at, because it's so easy to lose these little quads. So then last but not least, we've got just, you know, a couple of silicone wire battery leads, and we're going to be using XT30s for this build. Now these are very similar to XT60s in shape, but they're about half the size, which makes sense because it's XT30 and not XT60. So we'll be wiring these up, and I think that these are kind of, you know, they should become the standard. If we hold it up next to an XT60, you can see there's quite a big difference there. It may not look like much on the camera, but when you've got it on this tiny little quad, and you know, the whole quad, you're trying to cut gram for gram, because on these little guys, every gram counts so much more. You know, this is quite unwieldy compared to the size of the frame. This guy fits the profile much better. It really kind of attains what we're after in getting a nice, small, low profile, sub 250 gram quad. So I'm using XT30s on that. And then of course we've got just like our extra parts, extra motors. I got an extra ESC over here, all that kind of stuff. Every time that you build a quad, you want to make sure that you have extras of everything, because if you power everything up and you have one piece go bad, then you're shit out of luck until, you know, the next piece ships in the next couple of weeks. So let's go ahead and jump into building the frame.